Hello everyone, Ian Wishart here to welcome you aboard the SS Take A Pew as we continue our cruise through the world of Christian ministry and general mayhem.
Yes, ahoy there, me hearties. First mate Simon Clark here at your service. Ian, quite why have we adopted this maritime motif?
To be honest, I have no idea. It may just be subliminal as I'm currently reading one of Wilbur Smith's great seafaring novels. And in fact, we've just booked a lovely transatlantic crossing with Cunard.
Other cruise companies are available. Well, whatever. I hope this episode doesn't sink without trace.
Oh, I don't think there's much chance of that because we have a great guest to meet today in the person of Justin Brierley.
Oh, that'll be the first time that we've had both of a married couple on the show.
Yes, because of course Justin's wife Lucy was a guest in season 1.
Indeed. Now, unlike Lucy, Justin is not in ordained church ministry, but rather is a widely respected broadcaster, podcaster, writer and speaker.
That's right. And I think he will fit naturally into the rather intellectual nature of Take A Pew, as he is a great thinker and theologian.
Although, if my research is correct, he does spend a lot of time apologising.
Really? That's very strange. In any case, Justin spent 17 years working with Premier Christian Radio, where he became perhaps best known as the creator and host of the programme Unbelievable? ? Earlier this year, he struck out on his own, set up new podcasts, and has produced a new book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God.
And we're delighted to be able to find out more about all of that, as Justin's taken time out of his very busy schedule to visit us here at Take A Pew Towers.
Yes, so I guess we should get on with it. This is the Take A Pew podcast with Justin Brierley.
Justin Brierley.
And here we are indeed back at Take A Pew Towers in the glorious county of Surrey, which, for our overseas listeners...
Oh, what?
Yes, believe it or not, Simon, we do have lots of listeners outside the UK. And indeed, if you are one of those, we are delighted that you have joined us. Anyway, most importantly, we are here with someone with a truly international ministry, Justin Brierley. Justin, welcome to the show, and please take a pew.
Thank you. I'll just settle in. It's a little bit hard. Have you got any cushions for me?
Well, we'll find a couple of kneelers or something if we can. Best we could do.
Hello, Justin. It's really great to see you. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself to our lovely listeners.
Well, my name is Justin Brierley. I'm 43 years old. I'm married, as you said earlier, to Lucy Brierley, who's a minister in Woking. And we've got 4 kids. Noah is our oldest at 18, down to our youngest, Toby, who's 8. And yeah, I've been involved in the whole world of, well, as you called it, apologising, Christian apologetics, which I'll explain a bit later. But it's really about bringing Christians and non-Christians into conversation with each other. So that's kind of what I'm passionate about.
Brilliant, thanks Justin. Now we are looking forward to sailing smoothly through the familiar waters of the Take A Pew podcast, chatting about how you have navigated life thus far, exploring some of your favourite things, and of course joining the captain's table for your fabulous dinner party.
And alongside all of that fun, we will look at more weighty matters in Is It True?, your spiritual pearl of wisdom, and above all with one of my flagship random questions.
Marvellous. So let's begin at the very beginning. Where did life start for you, Justin? I understand it was somewhere that didn't entirely smell of shoes.
Well, Northamptonshire, if you're referring
maybe it did then.
Yeah, I mean, Northampton actually is known for shoes. So I thought maybe that was the reference you made, because I was born in Northamptonshire General Hospital. Northampton General Hospital.
What a remarkable coincidence.
Well, there you go. The football team is called the Cobblers after the trade that it's known for, in the past at least, of making shoes. Again, I'm part of quite a big family myself. Got 4 sisters, actually, one of whom's in labour right now.
Oh, wow, goodness.
But I don't know whether you guys know this at all, actually. I know that you are meticulous in your research, but whether you will have found this out about me, I don't know. I was actually born into effectively a kind of Christian commune, really.
I had heard that.
Yes. So this went under the name at the time of the Community, or Jesus Fellowship, came later to be known as the Jesus Army. It was a sort of quite radical instantiation of church being done sort of in community, with families living together in households. And my parents really had sort of been converted into that sort of form of Christianity when they were students at Oxford University, and they were living this quite radical lifestyle in many ways. So I kind of grew, my very early years were in that sort of environment.
So it's quite austere, I imagine.
Yes, because we didn't have TV, didn't have radio, didn't really have newspapers, things like that. Those were considered, to use their language, worldly. It was about sort of being very devoted just to the cause of Christ, but it did set up this kind of dichotomy between, you know, us and them, the world, and our sort of spiritual community. Yeah, it was something they left eventually. So I was in it probably until the age of about 6 or 7. And I think at one level it was amazing and brilliant. I mean, my dad would say now, many years later, that he can never remember a time where he was more kind of engaged in a sense with fellowship, with a sense of, you know, a vision for the Christian life. But it also came with some downsides, which were the reasons primarily that they left in the end, which partly it was because although the adults in the community had chosen that way of life, their children hadn't, but they were having to still live this very separate life from their peers, their people that the kids that they knew, because you still went to the local school and everything else.
Oh, okay.
And you
so mixing there would have been interesting.
But you were the Jesus freak if you went there. You know, you were like the weird kids who didn't have TV and didn't have, you know, couldn't, you know, join in all the things that kids normally talk about. And I think because my dad saw, especially my dad, I think saw the effect this was having on some teenagers when they got to teenage years, they were kind of going off the rails, rebelling. He then decided actually maybe this isn't the best place.
So you were released into the wild at the age of 6 or 7.
So they entered into a more kind of conventional kind of church going. You know, they joined a kind of a Baptist church, and they were involved in a few different charismatic evangelical churches, which I effectively grew up in.
So back in the mainstream, and actually you mentioned our meticulous research. And on the basis of my meticulous research, I know that for secondary education you went to quite an unusual school. I mean, certainly small.
Yeah, it was actually partly primary and secondary.
Right.
It was a very small independent school in Northampton called St Peter's. No longer exists, sadly, but it was only, I mean, it can't have been more than about 150 kids altogether. And this was literally from kindergarten through to sixth form. So these were really small class sizes. I mean, I was in my GCSE year, you know, I was in a class of 15 kids. It was almost like being in a big family in that sense, because, you know, as a sixth former, I knew who the 4 and 5 years olds were in the school and that sort of thing.
So it was a great blessing, really, to be in such a small environment.
It was. I think it comes with this, like anything, pros and cons. The great pro was I made some friends there who have, you know, I've been friends with for life, because you sort of really, you get to know them. And I think there was a sort of an atmosphere in the school which was very good in terms of it had that sort of sense of being a really close-knit community in that way.
So the atmosphere of the school, what the school was like, but we have a rather more personal question for you in our first regular feature, and that is...
What were you like at school? Were you a little bit geeky? Or were you a little bit freaky? Or were you a little bit cheeky? What were you like at school?
Yes, so what were you like at school?
I was definitely on the more geeky end,
right?
For sure. I mean, just even from the way I looked, I had these quite thick NHS-type glasses, a bowl cut, which for some reason my mum had obviously given me. And I just was quite a kind of bookish, hard-working teacher's pet, basically. And I just didn't hang around with the cool kids. You know, they were kind of a different breed to me. I hung around with my other slightly geeky friends. And
they must have been quite small gangs, though.
They were, effectively, yeah. I mean, looking back, it was like there were like 3 or 4 people in your class who were the cool kids, and then 3 or 4 of us who were the geeky kids. And then
do a bit of sports as well?
Again, not a big sports person. No. I mean, the only time I ever represented my school against other schools in football was once as a goalkeeper. And it only happened once because I think I let in about 13 goals.
To be fair, I mean, if that school had to put out a under-15s rugby union team, you'd have to have the entire year in the team.
Exactly. Yeah. They didn't have a great... I think that's why I ended up in goal. They didn't exactly have a lot of people to choose from.
Yeah, that must have been tough to get teams out. And what about other hobbies and interests as a youngster?
I started playing guitar. This was when I was slightly starting to manage to escape my more geeky phase at school. I started playing classical guitar at school, and while that is not the most ungeeky thing to do,
I think it's quite geeky still.
It's still quite geeky. I then kind of graduated from that to sort of strumming, and eventually, like, you know, in my sort of late teens. I was getting into Nirvana and that kind of thing at the time, in the sort of mid-90s. And I even formed a band with one of the cool kids in the class.
What was the band
Was
called?
briefly, you're gonna laugh.
Go on.
It was, my friend had come up with the title. It was called the Scoffing Tarts.
Oh,
And I
like it.
couldn't tell you exactly why, but that was the
very
name
nice.
we came up with. And we basically played one gig,
Right.
and it was our school Christmas disco. We had a couple of our own numbers and some covers, and it must have been awful, but it felt like we were rock stars for about half an hour. I just remember about halfway through, one of my guitar strings broke.
Oh, no.
My guitar was probably dreadfully out of tune, but you know, these
just
are the
call
things.
it punk. It's fine.
These are the things
Yeah.
that memories
Yeah.
are made of. So,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I have witnessed your guitar strumming in person.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we'll
Sorry
come
sorry
back-
about that, Ian.
We'll come back to that a little bit later. And teenage years, where was Faith going at this point?
Well, as I say, growing up in a Christian family and going to church was just part of the normal thing. I think my faith really became my own around the age of 15, and that was really partly through a wise and loving youth leader at my church, who was certainly a bit of a role model for me, but just sort of starting to sort of own my faith in that youth group setting. There was one particular weekend away that we did where it all kind of came together in Technicolor for me, and I would say that weekend especially, I had a sort of wham bam moment where it felt like faith came alive. I'd kind of just gone along with my parents up to that point, hadn't questioned it all that much, but hadn't exactly dived into it all that much either. But when I had this moment sort of in my around age 15, it definitely kind of became my own, and I became very, I would say, switched on and engaged with my Christian faith at that point.
It's quite a familiar story, the sort of youth weekend,
Yeah.
youth camp. It's
Yeah.
surprising a number of people even that we've spoken to. That
Yeah.
that's been
I think in some ways the research shows that actually most people will have made a decision probably before they hit their 20s. I think it's much harder in a way when you're older to change your mind on anything almost. And so it's very valuable, I think, when you do have that experience. And obviously not everyone has that experience.
Yeah,
but-
yeah. So we've sort of covered childhood already, which brings us on to our second regular feature, which is...
What's your fondest childhood memory? What's your fondest of all your childhood memories? What's your fondest?
Oh. Yes. Your very carefully chosen word, fondest.
Fondest.
Your fondest childhood
memory. Oh gosh. I don't know whether it's strictly speaking my fondest, but it's one of my very earliest, and one that for some reason has just stayed there in my mind. I couldn't have been more than maybe 4 or 5 years old when this happened, but it was going back to when I was in that community. And I mean, this makes me sound like some terrible story of tragedy saying this. It wasn't, but in that community, you didn't have, I later discovered, basically, the same things that most kids of that age would have had, you know, access to basically sweets and chocolate and crisps and things. But I just remember one day, one of the older girls in the community somehow had managed to obviously get hold of a packet of Wotsits. And she played this rather inventive game where she put Wotsits in some envelopes and kind of distributed them around the garden or the grounds of the house. And you had to kind of be the postman and try and find these envelopes. And I just have a memory of this being the most fantastical, amazing thing I'd ever witnessed. Not just the fun of the game, but tasting these Wotsits that I'd never tasted before and think, what is this like manna from heaven that suddenly appeaed in my life? So
Yes,
that for whatever reason, that memory sticks in
That's
my
right.
mind.
Do you think actually the manna that's mentioned in the Bible during the 40 years in the wilderness, do you think that may have actually been Wotsits?
It may have been
Could well have
Wotsits.
been,
It's
couldn't it?
quite possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, could well have been.
Because, you know, you can hardly find a more amazing, glamorous
amazing,
food than Wotsits, can you? So
And they do disintegrate quite quickly.
They do.
So
Your
they
mouth
wouldn't have lasted
feels-
overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think I might research that. No, that's a very fond memory. I like that. I like fond memories. And they just sort of leap to mind, don't they?
They do. I'm sure I could come up with lots of other kind of lovely childhood memories,
No,
but
but
that
it's-
was the one that kind of presented
They're the
itself.
ones that really
Yeah.
hit the spot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you obviously did okay at school because you ended up going up to Oxford university to study personal protective equipment, I understand, which I thought was a very strange subject.
It was quite foresighted of me, really.
It's very relevant
to
to
do
these days
that.
as well. It's everyone
Absolutely.
needs PPE.
No, the PPE that I studied was not personal protective equipment.
Oh, really?
It's
dear.
it's 3 subjects that you can choose: politics, philosophy, and economics.
Oh, that makes more sense, doesn't it?
So
Okay.
I'm afraid it's the subject that many a Tory Prime Minister has studied at Oxford. It's a classic subject that people who go into politics maybe do, but equally people who go into journalism, go into city jobs, things like that.
Yes, it seems sort of a catch-all if you're not really quite sure what to
Yeah,
study.
exactly. I think
you do
that's
this
probably
strange
true.
thing called PPE.
It's probably true in my case.
You obviously weren't particularly blazing a trail going to Oxford because you said both your parents had been there, but for the school, is it unusual for the school to have someone?
Yeah, I was the first person to go from my school. I mean, that's partly just because it's such a small school, so that was a bit of a big deal for the headmaster when I got in, and for me, obviously.
And you came out of that. I presume you came out with some sort of
I did.
HND or something.
Well, I dropped the E in PPE as soon as I
right.
could because I was rubbish at maths, basically. So I focused after the first year on politics and philosophy and really enjoyed that. I wasn't intending to be a philosopher or a politician, but it did give you the sort of critical tools for thinking and dissecting things and so on. And so that did actually, I discover, serve me really well in what I did end up going on to do.
So were you sort of doing any speaking at that time, sort of getting up and doing debating societies
to
and
be
stuff?
honest, funnily enough, I was far more engaged. If I was doing anything extracurricular, it was all on the drama side. I was really into drama. So I was part of something called the Christian Arts and Drama Society. We used to do sketches and mimes, sometimes like for Christian events, but also like out on the street, sort of street evangelism. But I was also very involved in student-run theatrical productions. I was in The Importance of Being Earnest and Jeeves and Wooster, a musical called Honk, Jesus Christ Superstar. I actually met my wife Lucy while doing Guys and Dolls. So that's another story. But yeah, so all of that was sort of my life outside of actual studying.
So then it came a decision as to what to do with, and actually mentioning Lucy, she did mention that you had a year in Namibia some point, but I think you actually had a time in Africa before that.
I did. So I took a gap year before going to university, and I went to Uganda for 6 months of that. And then very greedily I took another one after university with Lucy, who I'd obviously met, and so we got married fairly soon out of university, and then we went for 8 months to Namibia together before we started sort of proper adult life.
So I would guess that those 2 visits probably left you with quite a soft spot for Africa.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, Lucy and I had one other trip to Africa just before we got married with a university group from her chapel that went out to do a project there in Uganda again. And that was just a month, but all 3 of those times where I have able to be in Africa for a significant period of time have really, given me a great love for that continent and particularly the countries that we visited. I have kept up friendships with a lot of people that I met from both occasions there, and continue to support several projects in Uganda specifically. But it's an amazing country. I think I would say, as much as obviously me finding my faith in my mid-teens was significant, and obviously meeting Lucy, actually that experience of those gap years in Africa really did, I think, shape me in all kinds of ways that I'm so grateful for now, because it just opens your eyes to the bigger, wider world, not just the world, but the Christian world. It did just give you a much wider picture of what the church is, and I think sometimes we can get a little bit in our bubble. And that was just a really good way right early on in my life of being able to see, wow, this thing is much bigger than just my little experience of it.
It's really broadening horizons.
Yeah.
So finished uni, Namibia for a bit. While you were over there, if I remember rightly, Lucy went back, got accepted for
You've done your
training.
research, my goodness.
Well, I do remember the previous conversation we had with
that's
Lucy.
right. Okay, because she would have told this story.
Yes. And so therefore you were, at that point, going back. She was going to do this training, I guess, if I remember rightly, in Cambridge. And presumably you had to find a job or something.
That's right. So we kind of went out there shortly after getting married with very little idea of what either of us would be doing. When we got back, I knew that I hoped to go into some kind of journalistic thing.
Okay.
I was really interested in the idea of radio. She had started the process for candidating for ministry in the United Reformed Church, but it was while we were out there that she actually flew back for a week, yes, to go on the selection conference, and they kindly let her know at the end of that week that they were going to put her forward. So we at least knew when she got back that life then would begin again in Cambridge, where the theological college was. But I still didn't know what I would be doing when I got back. And it was actually, interestingly, the director of the charity we were out there for who sort of helped me on my journey, because when he visited us as a sort of missionary couple, he said, I just had an interview recently on this radio station called Premier Christian Radio to talk about the charity. And Justin, I know you're looking for things in radio. Why don't you send them an email? Which I did from, the internet cafe in the nearest town, when I got the next chance to go in. And that turned into me, when we did return, starting just some sort of work experience type of thing at Premier Christian Radio, which turned in the end to me working there for over 20 years. So, coming back and starting at the radio station, Lucy beginning her training for ministry, those were very exciting years, because I was learning something completely new. She was learning something completely new, and it was the start of it all.
Fantastic. And I think probably had a baby along in that period as well, isn't it?
That's right. So in her final year, we had Noah. So he was born in Cambridge, but it was sort of only less than a year later that we were coming to Woking, where Lucy would begin her first and only up till now pastorate. So
what about the battle of which church to go to, though?
Obviously, you didn't have to go to United Reformed Church while Lucy was training.
Yeah.
But it made sort of sense to try.
Really not to, really.
But yeah, Lucy's tradition, the United Reformed Church, was very different actually from the one I'd grown up in, which was a far more charismatic evangelical. URC arguably is a more kind of mainstream sort of denomination. And I think we did have quite a few differences when we met about the way we thought church should be, and even theologically at some level. But we sort of managed to work that through. I think in the end, we sort of brought the best of both our worlds together, hopefully. Yeah. And I think, again, just as that time in Africa helped me to see a bigger picture on Christianity, I think actually meeting Lucy did the same thing. It helped me to see that my experiences obviously were important for me, but you couldn't generalize them for everyone. Other people have different ways of meeting God and through different church traditions. And so for me, it was kind of a good thing to kind of have that process.
Yeah. So Premier obviously became a major part of your life so far. Started work experience, but obviously went on from there. How did that all pan out?
Well, I pretty quickly progressed from just being there as a bit of a temp to them giving me a contract to work there. And early days, that was doing things like producing and just listening through a lot of the Bible teaching programs that they would put out. The story behind that is that early on in their life, they had kind of got a rap over the knuckles from the Broadcasting Authority, because there'd been a concerted attempt by an organisation called something like the Occult and Mysticism Federation to try and get them taken off air. And the reason for that, the way they did that, was to sort of have people listening 24 hours to these Bible teaching programs and then putting in lots of objections to the radio authority when they heard things that might be sort of counted.
Goodness
as
me, surely life's too short for that.
So, well, you might think so, but anyway, a number of claims were submitted. Most of them were dismissed, but one or two I think were upheld, and so they decided that they needed to make sure that every program was like listened through thoroughly, and any possible kind of point of controversy that could be used had to then be either edited out or whatever. Anyway, so I got the job.
That was your job. Right.
Listening through hours and hours of Bible teaching programs. I mean, in a way, it was great because I learned a lot of Bible. I learned a lot of teaching. I didn't agree with everything I listened to, but that's true today. It was a bit of a different introduction to the world of radio. I did also start to contribute to live radio as well. I had a co-hosting slot on the breakfast show, and I was doing that for 3 or 4 years. But it was about 3 years in that I sort of started to want to carve out my own sort of show. I think there comes a point when you want to, put your own stamp on something.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'd kind of dipped in and out of Christian apologetics. So just to define what that is, it's not saying sorry for something.
No need to be defensive.
It's basically it's a long tradition in Christianity of making an intellectual defense of your faith. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to bring non-Christians on air and sort of have conversations with them, a Christian opposite a non-Christian, about why you do believe what you believe. And that was how the thing began. And at that point I didn't really knew how long it would last, but in the end, that show with me as the host was 17 and a half years.
Amazing,
And
so how many episodes did you do?
Oh, well, I guess, and basically it was weekly.
Right,
So
okay.
if you just times
So
17 and a half
52,
by 52.
Which is nearly 100, I think, isn't it?
It's, I mean, the big thing was that not only did it end up becoming just a radio show, which was for the first couple of years, but in around 2007, we started podcasting as well. And we were, in that sense, very early adopters of podcasting. And then I started to see it organically spread beyond just the sort of Christian audience that the radio station had in London and to the rest of the country, but also globally.
Yeah.
And increasingly was getting emails from overseas and people who started to listen to the show because it was a bit different, you know, this concept of bringing Christians and non-Christians together.
And it's nice to have constructive, non-combative conversations about those sort of things.
And sometimes combative conversations, because
Yes,
some of them
I'm
could,
sure
be,
they were,
could be, you know, quite sparky. It was.
Did you ever have to stop a discussion?
I did, yeah, on at least a couple of occasions
Right.
when things got a little bit rowdy or out of hand.
So how did you do it? Just say, look, stop, calm down, have a cup of tea.
Fight.
Except we weren't allowed cups of tea in the studio.
Oh, no.
I once spilt one over a mixer and
Oh, dear.
it wasn't good. The thing was really that it depended on who you were inviting in and the topic. Most of the time it was very friendly, and even if there was a significant disagreement, they'd do it in a sort of friendlyish way. But I mean, some of them, especially in the early years, some of the most controversial and rowdy sort of conversations I hosted were on Islam, where I might bring quite a strong Islamic opponent opposite a sort of Christian apologist who kind of evangelizes Muslims. And those would you'd usually see some sparks fly in those ones. And this particular one was a particularly contentious topic, and the two speakers, I think, already had some beef with each other, and things got a little bit out of hand, and I had to sort of stop the recording at one point and say, guys, if we don't all just calm down here, you know. Wow. But that was rare. Most of the time it was a bit more genteel.
Great
than
success.
that.
So you must have heard kind of the whole array of arguments across the board, etc. Did anything sort of still stump you? You know.
Well,
still
initially, lots of
surprise you?
things. I mean, I basically learned as I went with that
Yeah.
show. So there were lots of things where I didn't have a clue how to respond to it, but I brought someone on who I thought might have a clue to how to respond to it. So I was learning along with the audience. But you know, over time, you kind of become more familiar with the arguments for and against, and some of the classic sort of ways of countering that. And I think I just started to put together the bigger picture of Christianity really through that show. I hadn't done a theology degree like my wife had, but I felt like I almost did a theology degree of sorts just by hosting this show week in, week out. So I think it was about 10 years into doing the show that I wrote my first book, which is kind of, by that point, I felt I had enough knowledge and a kind of a picture myself of how this stuff all fitted together to be able to actually write something where I kind of made the case for faith myself. It was almost like, if you don't ever put yourself in the firing line, then actually I think you can develop quite a sort of one-dimensional faith, because it's actually, I think it's sometimes by having the ideas tested and having to, sometimes rethink what you think and find a different way of understanding it, that your faith, I think, actually comes out stronger in the end. It's like, you know, there's that old proverb that iron sharpens iron, and sometimes it's in the battleground of having those conversations that I came out often challenged, but also in the end I felt with a bit of a deeper, more nuanced, stronger faith in the end than the one I'd started with, you know.
So by this stage then you're already podcasting, broadcasting, writing books, and I think you were writing with Christianity magazine as well, the Premier's magazine.
Yeah, so I started as well, alongside doing the regular Unbelievable show and one or two other bits for radio. I started writing fairly regularly for Christianity magazine, or Premier Christianity magazine as it came to be known. And I think, when was it? It would have been in around 2015, I think, that I was invited to become the editor of the magazine. And that was, initially I thought, no, I couldn't possibly do that, because I'm already running this radio show and had lots else going on in my life. But I don't know, I got persuaded, or something happened which made me think, actually, maybe I could do this with the right support. And I did have some good support around me. So that was an exciting, about 3.5 years that I edited the magazine. And it was a really good time, because I'd kind of, my head was very much in that Christian apologetic space. But this actually forced me to kind of take a bit of a wider look at the church and theology and everything. And it was a very good good time, and I made a lot of connections with a lot of people.
And doing much speaking as well?
Starting to pick up more speaking engagements. It was more when I wrote the book, which came out in 2017, that I got more invitations to start speaking at events and conferences and things, because that was when I was more making the case myself. So that sort of changed the dynamic a bit.
Yeah, yet another arrow to your bow, or string to your bow, whatever the expression is. And but all good things must end, and in the last year at least, you kind of decided to change tack slightly.
Yeah, well, quite significantly, really, because as I say, I'd really grown up, both in terms of my own theological understanding, my career, and everything really had really been shaped by these 20 years that I spent at Premier Christian Radio, beginning the Unbelievable show, having that time editing Christianity magazine, and just sort of generally engaged in the whole world of Christian theology and apologetics. But I think it was probably in the 2020 lockdown, that I started to get the sense that maybe the time would come when actually I needed to step into my own sort of, be able to do things outside of the sort of the Premier thing, basically, and collaborate more with other organisations, and start to just take a bit more ownership over some of the material that I now wanted to start producing as well. So, and that all really came together in 2022 when I finally decided, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet. And after, as I say, 20 years at that point of working, I said, I'm going to kind of sort of set out in my own right as a freelance sort of producer, broadcaster, writer. And it was Easter 2023 when I finally kind of, began this new phase of my life.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not a decision taken lightly. It was a very bittersweet goodbye to a show that I founded and hosted and loved for so many years, which continues, with new hosts and so on. But it did feel, for all kinds of reasons, it was the right time for me to start.
And so
out.
Since then, just the last few months really, but you've now got another podcast.
Yeah, so
Re-Enchanting.
fairly hot on the heels of me leaving. There's a new podcast called Re-Enchanting, which I've developed with something called the Centre for Cultural Witness in London. That's run by Bishop Graham Tomlin, and but it goes online under the name Seen and Unseen. It's a website really aimed at, in a secular world, helping to kind of show why the Christian faith has kind of shaped the Western world, even in ways we don't realise. And that's the idea of the Re-Enchanting podcast. We film it at the top of its wonderful location where they're based, Lambeth Palace Library, on this rooftop view across the Houses of Parliament and London. So it's a fantastic sort of place to film and record this podcast and video show. But essentially, me and my co-host Belle, we try to just bring on interesting people who are not known necessarily for being Christian, and some of them are not Christian, but who, in their sphere of influence, are interested in re-enchanting a secular, materialist kind of world with the story of Christianity. And so we've had some great conversations. First season had some people like, they're not necessarily household names, but they're kind of big in my world. They're people who are, even as secular people sometimes, re-enchanting, as we say, the world with the Christian story. So Tom Holland is a podcaster. He hosts a very popular history podcast called The Rest is History. And he's written this huge book, Dominion, on the way in which the West really has been in every way shaped by the Christian story, even if we don't realise it now as a largely secular country. And again, he's someone who, is hard to nail down exactly where he is himself on the faith thing, but he has this fascinating story of realising that as far as his moral instincts are concerned, he is a Christian. It was the Christian story that gave him his belief in justice, equality, dignity, human rights, and so on. So people like him, those are the kinds of people that we were interested in bringing on to just point out the fact that even though we are a very secular country these days, actually, we're still kind of oddly Christian as well. So that's been fascinating, being able to host those kinds of conversations. It has, it's gone well. We just started season 2 at the time of recording. Frank Skinner, our first guest of our season 2, which is fun. He's not that many people know, they know him as a successful comedian, but not many people necessarily know he is a very devout Catholic as well. And so it was fun to talk about how he squares what has often been a very edgy or downright, rude comedy that he's done over the years, and his own sort of pretty, crazy life with his Catholic faith. But it was an interesting conversation.
Sounds great fun. Yeah. And most recently, I know you've just come back from 2 little trips to the United States of America. I guess mainly supporting your brand new book.
Yes.
The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God.
That's right. Yeah. So this has sort of been something that I've been working on for the last year or two, and it very much, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God as a book came about because I was seeing the conversations on the shows that I was hosting changing quite dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. So really the show Unbelievable was born in the heyday of New Atheism being this quite dogmatic form of anti-religion, with these well-known public characters, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, who wrote these best-selling anti-God books. And for several years, there was a real kind of movement, cultural movement, where, atheism was a trendy thing. There was even a kind of bus campaign. I don't know if you remember that in the UK. There's probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life. And just, rallies and conferences and quite a sort of religion is bad for you kind of vibe. And in a way, that was a great foil for these conversations I was having. And I would quite often have these quite bombastic debates between these new atheist type thinkers and Christians. But I did notice a change in the tone of the conversation over the years, where increasingly people who were coming on as atheists were saying, well, I'm not a Richard Dawkins kind of atheist. Yeah. They were saying that they were noticing that whole movement, the new atheist movement, had in its own way got kind of religious almost, in terms of its own sort of fundamentalism. And I was noticing a lot more secular thinkers start to take Christianity seriously again, noticing that, we can't really live without some kind of a story to guide our lives. And the new atheism sort of tore God down, but didn't really replace God with anything for people to live their lives by. And so I was noticing other interesting secular intellectuals who weren't believers or Christians necessarily, but they were saying things like, well, maybe we need to take a second look at the Christian story. Maybe it did actually give us the values that we hold dear and things like that. And other people like well-known Canadian psychology professor Jordan Peterson, who I talk about a bit in the book, who's sort of somewhat controversial character.
Quite edgy, isn't he?
Somewhat controversial character, quite sort of divisive, arguably, politically. But he's drawn massive crowds, especially of young men, kind of looking for answers, looking for reason, for purpose in their life, and sort of pointing them back to the Bible, interestingly. If you read his best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life, it's basically packed with biblical references and stories. And again, even though you can't quite tell where he lands, when I had him on my show for a conversation and I asked him outright, do you believe in God? He basically said, well, depends what you mean by God. It's a bit hard to nail down. Yeah. Still, he and others have been opening the door intellectually for people to walk through to Christianity. So the book is really sort of looking at that phenomenon, and that even though a lot of people think Christianity's on the way out, when you look at, statistics, church attendance, the number of people who claim a Christian faith going down every year and so on, I actually think that doesn't quite tell the full story, because people are still actually quite religious. They just get religious about different things. And the question is whether the things they're now getting religious about in our culture can actually sustain them, whether those stories can. And I just don't think they can. And I think the Christian church has always had this cycle of kind of death and rebirth, basically. And I think we might be heading towards one of those rebirth moments in our culture. Yeah.
Very good. And encouraging sales?
Yes. I think it's too early to say, really, because at this point, I haven't had any figures. It's only just released in September. But lots of good reviews, which is great. It's just been nominated for an award for Christianity Today in the USA, which is great.
Okay,
and lots of lovely endorsements from nice people, and lots of interviews and things. And perhaps by the time this podcast goes out, I've also been working on a podcast documentary series based off the book with the same title, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. So if you go and look for that online, you might find one or two of the first episodes.
Well, what a busy chap you are. Extraordinary. But and even just listening to all that you get up to has made me a bit pecky, so I'm pleased to confirm that very shortly we'll be settling down to your Take A Pew dinner party.
Oh, good.
But before that, of course, it's time to play a game which has become known among our listeners as a game. And that is My Favourite Things.
My favourite things.
Yes, this is a very simple game, Justin. We give you a series of categories, and all you have to do is tell us your favourite thing in each.
Okay, and our first category is always your favourite book of the Bible.
Oh, right. Okay. I think it's Acts. It's just a super romp Great stories. We do puppets at our church, and we once did a whole puppet series just doing the Book of Acts, and it's brilliant for puppets because there's so much
the whole
action and
book?
fun. Yeah, it was quite.
That must have taken a while.
It
I
did.
agree. I think it's the only answer. I think some people
might
come
say
up with
that.
ridiculous like Psalms or something. But if you had to go Old Testament,
If I had to go Old Testament, probably again Genesis, just for the same
Yeah, I
reason.
reckon.
It's got some romping great
You like
stories.
the story ones.
Yeah, and obviously it's laying the ground for everything that comes in the New Testament. I wouldn't want to choose between any of the books really, but I just think it's a great book for just reading and enjoying in that way.
Now, Justin, when Lucy was a guest on the show, we had our Tell Us, Reverend, What's in Your Lunchbox feature. These days, of course, we instead have the dinner party. But just for old times' sake, we'd like to know your favourite sandwich.
I'd have to go back to this was what was in my lunchbox every day when I was at school. It was cheese and pickle sandwich.
Oh, cheese and
I
pickle.
like a cheese and pickle sandwich, and I think I just grew up on cheese and pickle sandwiches as a kid.
do you often partake of a cheese and pickle these days?
Well, not as often as I used to, because it was literally in my lunchbox every lunch day at school. But I still like a good cheese and pickle
Very
sandwich.
good. Good strong cheddar or
Ideally,
nothing
yes.
too controversial.
Just a good strong mature cheddar. I don't mind whether it's pickle or chutney or whatever. Just something tangy and nice.
Yeah, very good. I feel quite nostalgic
Yes,
talking
yeah,
about
I do.
sandwiches.
Actually, taking
Yeah,
us
it's very
back,
good.
isn't it?
Anyway,
Absolutely.
right, our third category is always a top five, and this season, as last season, it's your top 5 films.
Okay.
So, top five.
Now, I'm not a big film buff, so I really had to think about this.
I was thinking you had a weak start because you probably didn't see a film for quite a few years.
Well, that's the ironic thing. I don't have as many of those kind of formative childhood memories of those films that kids grow up on because I didn't start watching films till I was 7 or 8. But so a film I really got into again in my sort of teenage years was actually it was a cartoon, but it was kind of adult cartoon. It was anime. It was the sort of first generation of manga at the time. It was called Akira, and it was this sort of slightly post-apocalyptic kind of drama with teenagers in, basically. But I loved the art and I loved the style, and I even ended up like just in my own rudimentary way like drawing scenes from Akira on my own computer and printing them off and distributing them to my classmates who thought this was amazing. So it got me some credibility points. But Akira was just, for some reason, a film I loved as a teenager. So that would be one.
Okay, good, quite obscure choice. We like that.
Yeah. A less obscure choice, Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Love Forrest Gump. Yeah. It's just, I just love the way it's kind of epic. I just love it, the way it takes you through all the different eras of history and the fun that's there, but also kind of the serious heart at the centre of the film. I know it's a bit sentimental in its way, but it's a favourite, and I've watched it a few times now with the family as well. So it's,
I haven't watched it for a while actually.
You should do. I think it's one of the ones that's aged really well.
It's a great film.
It's great. So I love Forrest Gump. I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan as well. Obviously, he was a well-known apologist, but again, this goes back to my sort of dramatic leanings. I actually played the part of his stepson, Douglas Gresham, in a theatrical production of Shadowlands when I was around 12, 13. I knew C.S. Lewis through Narnia and that kind of thing, but that introduced me to his life a bit. And then at the same time that we were doing that production, they were filming the Anthony Hopkins version of C.S. Lewis's life, Shadowlands. So I had a very close sort of relationship with that, and I still enjoy watching it from time to time. So Shadowlands with Anthony Hopkins is another favourite of mine. That would be my top 5. I like sci-fi. I'm kind of, if I tend to go and watch something for myself, it's often sort of sci-fi. And I do think that Christopher Nolan's films are amazing, and he's just such a different, interesting filmmaker. So I've seen all his films, but the one probably that I found most interesting and have gone back to watch a couple of times is Interstellar.
Yes.
So that's just I think quite an extraordinary film in its way, for all kinds of reasons. And then finally, because actually most of the films I watch are with my wife, Lucy, she is a great fan of the rom-com. And while that's not my natural genre, there's a few that I have really enjoyed watching with her.
Yeah, some good ones.
And so The Holiday, I don't know if you guys have watched The Holiday. That's there just because I've got lovely associations. We saw it when it first came out at the cinema, and we've watched it a number of times since. Partly it's because was partly filmed around
Just down
these
the road,
parts in Surrey. So we've been to some of the places where it was filmed. So The Holiday would feature.
We actually drove through Shire where it was filmed. while they were filming it, unbeknownst to us, and it was like June, and we drove through, and all of a sudden the whole village was covered in snow.
You're right.
And obviously,
There you
the actual
go.
snow. They just sprayed snow, all the fields. And
Did you see
everything.
Cameron Diaz?
Didn't see anyone there. No idea what was
Are
going
you
on.
actually in it? Did you get a little...
No, I don't. I wouldn't have done that. Great selection.
That's really good.
Varied
Yeah.
selection.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Now, our penultimate category is the exquisitely curated Great 8. 8 quickfire categories designed to unveil our guest's true character.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here we go. 8 quickfire categories. Starting with your favourite author.
C.S. Lewis.
Thought it might be.
Yeah. Favourite type of food?
I really like lasagna.
Ooh. Okay. Favourite television programme.
Favourite TV program. Right now, it's usually whatever sort of latest thing Lucy and I are watching, and we're a bit behind, but we've just started watching 24. The Kiefer
Oh,
Sutherland.
yeah.
Right.
So I find that quite fun.
Okay. And through history, what would you say TV programmes meant the most to you?
Okay, I would say I've really enjoyed some of those sort of fast-paced, quite engaging thriller type stuff. I remember we really got into like The Bodyguard. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That was
out?
good.
Those kinds of things are the ones. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Favourite sport?
I am not a sports person, as you've heard, but if I had to choose one, it would probably just be football, because I enjoy, like everyone does, watching the World Cup.
Right, that'll
Yeah,
do.
that's
Favourite band or musical artist?
U2. I know it's a bit of a boring choice for a Christian, but I kind of discovered their music in my teens, and they've always been a bit of a background soundtrack to my life.
Stuck with it.
Yeah, it's
Brilliant.
allowed. It's allowed.
Yeah, that's allowed. Favourite holiday destination?
Whew. We've been fortunate enough a few times now to be able to go to California, and I don't love everything about America, but there's something about the beach vibe, California, the sun and the surf, and being there with the family especially, that's great. So that's been my favourite holiday destination.
Yeah. And it's very surprisingly varied as well, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, favourite chocolate bar?
I think it would have to be like quite a chunky Lion Bar, something like that. Something that's got a bit of variety in it.
Bit chewy.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favourite board game?
I think it probably is, again, boring choice, but Monopoly, just because I just remember growing up when we used to play Monopoly, there just being probably like a whole day you would spend like trying to drive the rest of your family into the ground, by taking over the whole thing. And so I've got good memories of Monopoly. It's kind of one you have to invest in, though. Isn't it? You don't sort of... It's not the kind of thing you can just do in half an hour.
No,
It's
It
great
can-
when you
can
win,
take
isn't
a
it?
while.
When you win at Monopoly, you've got all the money hoarded. No, sorry, I won't go there.
It's a property magnate.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
our final category on my favourite things is also multiple choice. Now, typically I would give you 3 possible answers, but we thought you might be up to the challenge of 4 possible answers. Okay. So you are known, as we have discussed, for your love of theology. So we'd like to know your favourite Theo. So as I say, 4 possible answers. Children's fiction writer Theo Geisel. Former US President Theodore Roosevelt. Classic music television programme The Old Grey Whistle Test. Or London entertainment venue Theo 2.
Wow. Okay.
Favourite
That's
Theo?
quite a few unexpected Theos. I'd say of those 4 options, Theo 2,
Yes.
music venue, only because I have been fortunate to go to a couple of gigs, including a U2 gig there actually, which stuck in the memory, and so I've got. Yeah, I have little to connect me to Theodore Roosevelt, or I don't, and to be honest, I've never heard of that children's writer you mentioned.
No, yeah.
So,
Theo Geisel, do you want to know? He's better known as Dr. Zeus.
oh, okay. Oh, well, I've
Yes,
heard of Dr. Seuss, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I think I would go with the O2.
Yes, and you probably weren't allowed to watch the Old Grey Whistle Test when you were
Well, I've watched a few sort of, on when they come,
Retrospectives.
and I have enjoyed 1 or 2 episodes of it. It was more my dad's generation, though,
Yes.
the Old Grey Whistle.
That's probably fair. Yeah, I feel old now.
You watch it a lot, don't you?
Yeah, in my early 30s, I used to watch it religiously. on my knees. Well, I think that's given us a splendid insight into the world of Justin Brierley, setting us up very nicely to take our seats around a rather beautifully decorated table, because
It's the fabulous Take A Pew dinner party. The miraculous Take A Pew dinner party. The food is quite irrelevant and some of the guests are odd. It's the impractical, fantastical Take A Pew dinner party.
Yes, Justin, a quick reminder of our dinner party rules. You can have all of your family and friends there, of course, but there remain 4 empty chairs for you to fill.
yes, and to do that you have to select one person from any time in history, dead or alive, a cartoon character, and a non-domesticated animal. And then on the final chair we find a gramophone player which will play the single piece of music of your choice throughout the dinner.
So, Justin, your first choice, the one person from the whole of history that you would choose to join you for dinner. And remember, it can't be anyone who appears in the Bible or any of your family.
Okay. Again, very predictable, but C.S. Lewis, just because I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan, as if that hasn't become already obvious from this podcast. But just because whenever I read him, I just find new insights and things that I wish I could have said as well as he said. And I just think he would just be really interesting. Quite apart from, him being a great Christian thinker and everything, I just think he was an interesting person. The thing he actually spent his life really working on wasn't apologetics or theology or Narnia. It was sort of the history of English literature. And he was just, in his time, he was the de facto expert on that. And I just think he would be super interesting on any subject. He'd have interesting thoughts. And so what a perfect dinner party guest to have. So for sure, C.S. Lewis
He would be
my
great
person from history.
And you could share old Oxford memories. And
Yes, there's a little bit of shared in that sense. Our worlds have overlapped ever so slightly, and there'd be that aspect to it too.
Great. Okay, so to accompany CS, a cartoon character.
Well, I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous, I think Homer Simpson
Right.
would, just because I quite enjoy The Simpsons, and I just think Homer Simpson is one of the best cartoon characters that's ever been created.
Yeah.
Because he's this sort of lazy, underachieving, does everything wrong character, and yet he's also incredibly lovable, and you just know he would do anything for his family. And I just think he's a brilliant creation, and somehow a great statement on humans generally.
I think he'd have a delicious conversation with C.S. Lewis.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of philosophy would go on between them, I think. wouldn't
Quite
it?
possibly, yeah.
Quite
I don't know
different
how
angles,
many
maybe.
kind of quotes Homer could really come up with. He's obviously named after a philosopher himself in a way, but when you actually watch The Simpsons, they do it very cleverly, don't they? But you actually get a lot of interesting life lessons and things come through him.
Brilliant, okay. And then a non-domesticated animal.
Yeah, I was struggling with this one.
All right.
This is an animal that could talk, could connect, or just would be there as an interesting.
Well,
I think we like to keep this as realistic as possible. So
Right, so they would just be there. I mean, if I had to choose one, I think I'd choose a non-domestic. I'd choose a horse. Again, it goes back a little bit to the C.S. Lewis thing. I always found horses in C.S. Lewis's Narnia, so they were quite majestic animals and noble. And even the cross between man and horse, the centaur, is one of the most sort of noble and serious of all the animals. I hardly ever am around horses, so I don't claim to be an expert on them. But we did have an opportunity when we were in the US over the summer, my family and I, to go to a ranch where they particularly have a sort of a horse riding program, and they use it in this wonderful way, therapeutic way for kids and people with vulnerabilities and things. And I was introduced in a fascinating way to how much horses can actually speak into the lives of people, and they have their own characteristics and personalities. And it was only kind of sort of being around these horses I realised these are huge. Firstly, some of these horses are massive, very kind of majestic creatures. And I just thought, you know what, horses are amazing. So then when I saw your question, I thought it would have to be a horse. So
might have trouble sort of sitting around the table, I suppose.
yes, we have a nose bag.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
A bale of hay in the corner.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Very good. So it's already quite a magnificent assembled company, and all eating to the strains of what piece of music?
God, again, this was a tough one, but there's an album by Jeff Buckley. I don't know if you've come across Jeff Buckley. Rather tragically died rather young, but I was introduced to his music at university by a friend of mine who was a big fan. and I've really enjoyed his stuff. And he had this album called Grace, which is a great album, and the title track on that is a great piece. Just a wonderful sort of instrumentalist, and I just love the message in his music as well.
So it would imbue the occasion
It would.
with the right sort of
Yeah.
vibe. Would it get a little jarring after about 2.5 hours, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's many pieces of music that you want to just be on permanent repeat forever. And like so many people, you know, I tend to choose the music I'm listening to at any time to suit my mood and the occasion and what, you know, how I'm feeling. But if it had to be one track that was sort of there in the background, I think I'd go for that
Jeff
one.
Buckley.
Lovely.
Wonderful.
Well,
I'm sure it won't be too long until you are able to organise such a delightful gathering, Justin. And I'd like to confirm that Simon, Mark, the sound man, and I will all be available that evening.
Good.
Just saying.
Now, very shortly, we'd be delighted if you could bring some elegance to the show with your spiritual pearl of wisdom. But just before that, we would be very grateful for your cogent input into another ongoing Bible-related debate we've been having. As we step aboard the little part of the show that we like to call...
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Yes, is it true? And this time, Justin, we think we have quite a reasonable contention to share with you. You see, we know from Matthew's Gospel that an unspecified number of wise men visited an infant Jesus and presented gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, all highly prized, very valuable items. And we also know that shortly after that, Mary and Joseph were advised to make themselves scarce to avoid the wrath of nasty old King Herod. And it has been suggested that, although initially a little reticent to leave the country, Mary and Joseph clearly then thought to themselves, well, look, we've got an amazing fortune with all this gold, frankincense and myrrh. Why not use it to book the holiday of a lifetime in one of the top-class resorts in Egypt? You know, somewhere like Sharm el-Sheikh, bit of diving in the Red Sea, now that that's back to normal after Moses' thing. And so it was that the young Jacobson family spent a delightful 3 years enjoying a rather splendid all-inclusive Egyptian holiday. Of course, eventually the money ran out and they naturally went back to Israel and settled in Nazareth. Now, to be fair, not all of this detail is directly recorded in the Bible.
I don't quite remember that bit.
But Justin Brierley...
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Is it true?
I'm going to say it would be great if it were true, but I don't think it's true. No.
That's a shame.
I mean, I guess they could have sold those brilliant gifts they got. But
We don't hear what they did with all those riches, do we?
It's one of the mysteries, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like to think that rather than taking them immediately to the pawn shop to try and book themselves an all-inclusive holiday, Mary and Joseph perhaps treasured these gifts as some portent of the significance of their son. And who knows,
maybe.
That
would have been appropriate.
I mean, I'm surprised they haven't made an Indiana Jones film about it. What happened to the gold, frankincense and myrrh and its mystical divine properties.
What a good idea.
Yeah, this could be the next one.
Maybe we should do a podcast about it.
Absolutely.
But it's, I think as one would expect, your sage counsel has won the day on that one. I think we'll accept it's probably not true. And while we're on a roll, perhaps you could bless us with your spiritual pearl of wisdom.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Okay. I feel like anything I can say after that musical introduction will sound very twee, but here's my spiritual pearl of wisdom. So in this new book that I've written, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, I talk about the fact that this apologetics is a great thing to do. It's about showing that the Christian story is true, perhaps pointing to evidence from philosophy or science or history to show that God exists and that the Christian story really happened, which I love and I've devoted my whole life to doing. But I ran into a really interesting saying recently by Blaise Pascal, who was a sort of 17th century mathematician, philosopher, Christian. And he said, make religion attractive. Show good men why they would want it to be true, and then show them that it is. And I think he's onto something there, because sometimes we only do the latter. We only try to show people that it's true through this thing sometimes called apologetics. Here's evidence, here's reasons to believe. But actually, in my experience, people will only really engage with those reasons if they would kind of want it to be true in the first place. And I think that's sometimes where we've failed as Christians to engage people, is kind of in their imagination. Yes, we need to engage people's reason, but actually that's only half of what makes us human. Our kind of capacity to imagine and our deepest longings and desires, if you like, that's actually where we usually make most of our decisions in the end. So I think what Blaise Pascal said is true. We want to make people wish it were true. And that's actually coming back to C.S. Lewis, what he did brilliantly. He was a great apologist. He wrote books like Mere Christianity and The Problem of Pain to show people that they can believe in Christianity, that he tackled objections and gave them evidence and so on. But when he wrote the Narnia stories, he did something different. He created a world that we wanted to exist. Which of us hasn't knocked the back of a wardrobe just to see if there's a land of talking animals and fauns and knights and castles? But by creating that world with its majestic talking lion, Aslan, who was this beautiful, just, wise, but also not tame lion, he kind of showed us a world that we want to be. We wish the world was like that. We wish there was this world of valor and truth and adventure and beauty and dignity and right and wrong and the battle of good versus evil. And in a funny way, he showed us that by wishing that were true, well, what if it is true? Because actually, of course, he said in the Narnia stories, well, there is an Aslan in your world. You just know him by a different name, Lucy. And I find that that's actually the task of Christians. It's to show people why they would want this to be true, why their life and the things they love and the things they take most seriously, why that's pointing towards a story that they wish was true. And so I want to do that myself. And I think as Christians, we need to be kind of engaging people imaginatively with why they would want this story to be true in their lives and in our world. And then we might have some good reasons to show them that it really did happen, that someone called Jesus really did walk this earth and changed the world, and that there's a God behind this universe.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Well, thank you very much for that, Justin. And it's very nearly time for you to disembark from the SS Take A Pew. But whereas the Titanic had her iceberg, we have this.
Simon's random question.
Simon, what is your random question for Justin?
Well, Justin, I didn't want to trouble you with anything too complex. So my simple random question for you is this. Would you rather that the Earth rotated twice as fast or half as fast?
Oh, yes. That's a very simple question.
Wow. Well, I suppose that would make our days either twice as long or twice as short.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And while it would be nice to live double the length of time, effectively, I actually would really like my day to be a bit longer so I can fit more things into it. So I'm going to go for twice
Slower.
Slower rather than faster.
Because we're all saying there's not enough time in the day, do we?
That's right.
Yeah.
And suddenly there would be a lot of time in the day.
Would. Yeah. I'm sure you'd end up wishing you had even more, but
No, that's good.
It's
I like
quite.
that.
I mean, you quickly realise when you start thinking about it that everything we do by its nature, I suppose, including nature by its nature, is guided around the length of day that we have.
Yeah.
And if you change that by a factor of 2, otherwise, there would be some geological impacts.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Which,
I mean, going twice as fast. I don't know. Would it spin us all off into space or something?
No,
Who knows?
I think we'd be okay unless it got a lot faster, but the water levels would rise.
Yes,
because the water would be pulled from the poles to the centre of the Earth.
It would, wouldn't it?
Apparently.
Yeah.
So we'd lose all of Indonesia, most of Africa, and most of South America.
That's and if it slowed down equally, I'm sure there would be similar catastrophic results.
Yes. Everything would be warmer because the land would heat up more and
be more exposed to the sun, wouldn't it?
It would be horrible, I think.
Well, it's just as well we got the 24 hours we have got there.
Yeah, we'd actually weigh more, wouldn't we? If it was slower, we'd weigh
Would
more.
we?
Yeah, because of the
Well, I don't
Yeah,
need that. My
that'll
wife
change.
tells me I already weigh enough, so...
Yeah.
That's right. Well, if you go faster, then we'd weigh
We'd weigh less. We'd weigh less if
So
we
that'd
went
be
faster.
great for diets. But
Yeah.
I think,
Anyway, so we're
but,
going to go for slower.
yeah, so slower. I think overall it shows us that once
Yeah.
again everything is set up just right.
Yeah.
It's a bit like
Yes,
rolling a 6 on a die.
It's a
70
good
times in
apologetics
excess.
argument, yes, that our unique suitability of Earth for life.
Yes.
Having said all that, I think life, at a metaphorical level, we should probably all be living it a bit slower. So maybe that's another good reason
Yes.
to slow the Earth down.
Absolutely.
Well, thank the Lord, literally, that it's just about the right speed, and we're best off just as we are. But in any case, that was.
Simon's random question.
And so, Justin, we sailed gently back into port and safely docked the good ship Take A Pew. We very much enjoyed getting to know you a bit better. Thank you for putting up with our nonsense, and thank you for being on the show.
I really enjoyed all your nonsense. Thank you for having me.
And dear listeners, thank you for being with us. If you've enjoyed listening, please subscribe to and follow the show wherever you listen so that you don't miss out on future Take A Pew fun. And you can find all our previous episodes and other bits and pieces on the usual podcast platforms. If you'd like to hear more of Justin, where's the best place to go for that?
My website, justinbrierley.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you want to keep abreast of all my latest projects.
Marvellous. And if you haven't already, I would highly recommend getting hold of Justin's new book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Anyway, Simon and I will be back very soon to bring you plenty more fun, faith and flights of fancy. But in the meantime, it's Toodlepip from me.
And tutty bye from me.
Join us again next time as we Take a Pew.
Take a pew